Oh, hello again, people. I'm sorry you missed my weekly football episode. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a bit of a bumper one. This might be a bit bigger than some of the other videos. So international weekend is over. So I'm going to have a look, having sort of had the break, bit of reflection time, going through the first sort of month or so of Premier League football, how well I think teams are doing based on the results so far. Who do I think sort of hitting expectations a bit below, a bit above, and so on and so forth like that. Cool. So we're going to go alphabetical order. So I'm going to have a look at Arsenal. Generally speaking, I think Arsenal are where I sort of expected them to be. They had comfortable wins against Wolves, sort of comfortable wins against Villa, keeping clean sheets, being able to score goals, looking sort of assured against potential banana skins previous seasons. With the draw against Brighton, to which Arsenal, in theory, in the game should have hopefully sort of tied it up a bit better. They definitely had issues over the inconsistency of the refereeing in that game, because I think there definitely should have been cards to several of the Brighton players, as well as sort of the Rice incident. I think there was an issue there. Whether, if all those cards are dealt out, the result stays the same, I'm not sure, but they just didn't do enough, arguably, to get the win there. Next, we're going to go through Aston Villa. Sort of comfortable enough win against West Ham. Defeat against Arsenal, although they did the double over them last season. I wouldn't hold anything too much against them there, because Arsenal are a very good team, and just about getting a win over Leicester, who are still sort of trying to find their feet in the league. Villa, I want to see sort of, my expectations for Villa at the start of the season were sort of looking maintaining those European places while sort of having this Champions League run that they're on. This looks fairly solid. Obviously, they struggled against the big team, but they're getting the wins against sort of what I'd consider some of the team in the lower reaches of the Premier League, a team in the middle reaches of the Premier League. This is about spot on for Villa as far as I'm concerned. Next we have Brentford. Now Brentford have been a bit of a surprising one for me, as I honestly put them quite low down in the league based on the sale of Ivan Toney, who didn't really feature at all in any of these games. So Brentford themselves managed to get the 2-1 victory over Palace. They lost 2-0 to Liverpool, and they beat Southampton 3-1. Now the Palace one, there's a bit of fortune, I think, there because of sort of the Eze free kick, whether something sort of should have stood or not. But in fairness, I think a lot of people sort of had Brentford looking down, losing Tony as the sort of someone that they relied on quite a lot before. But this sort of goes to show the strength of Thomas Frank as a manager, once again being able to just find some way of making it work. They bought in replacements. They managed to go chunks of last season without Tony as their main striker, their main number 9, and they seemed to just find a way, and they will sort of keep doing that. So I might be a bit more bullish over Brentford, and sort of thinking that they might sort of ideally avoid the Premier League trapdoor. So another sort of strong, stable season. I think they're sort of getting the win that they expected against Southampton. Obviously, weren't going to get against Liverpool. A good result against Crystal Palace. Pretty solid. Bournemouth, I think, have been sort of an interesting one. They've obviously had a bit of change with their main striker Solanke to Spurs. They brought in Evan Nilsson. They sort of managed to get sort of the draws and the points. I think they need to, obviously, they haven't. The best thing I can say about them is they haven't lost, but there's still a lot of fight, a lot of grit, a lot of getting about. I think Areola still has set up his team very well. It wasn't a fluke. The way they sort of finished last sort of season, having sort of had a slow start, changing to his tactics, and they just sort of keep going. I don't know whether sort of with the Everton game, it's just their only win, the 3-2 win, is potentially down to them continuously going to the last minute or Everton sort of capitulating. I think it might be a little bit of both. But I mean, at the end of the day, I think everyone's sort of told that plays football is you play to the whistle and you just keep going. Just keep going. And some of the goals are very similar, but if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's as simple as that. Then we'll have a look at Brighton. Brighton have been the big surprise package. Sort of a new, young, sort of the German manager in Hösler. He looks, the team looks incredible. They heavily backed the team. They're one of the teams that spent the most in the transfer window, bringing in people like Yankuba Minter, as well as giving sort of a bit more sort of praise to some of the other players that are there due to the tactical sort of changes in how they set up. People like João Pedro have looked incredible. He's just up and down, just sort of getting the goals, making the difference, and he's someone that I think might be the next potential like big sale from Brighton, whether it's at the end of this season or the end of next one. Managing to sort of get the victory over Everton, which in the first half didn't look too comfortable, but once they got the goal, they happily killed it off. The victory against United, they sort of kept playing to the end. A little bit fortunate, as I think the Garnacho sort of Xerxes incident there, had Xerxes not been standing there, things might have obviously been different. It could have been a draw, it could have been a defeat. However, it is a win at the end of the day, so you can't really complain too much about that. And sort of the draw against Arsenal. Now, this could be, you could argue about the refereeing decisions in this game, but Brighton, regardless, you still have to keep playing, you still have to keep going, regardless of what the referee is doing. You just still got to get on with the game. Sort of sitting around complaining at the refs, it's not going to get the job done. You need to just keep going with it all. I'm slightly obviously worried, I think, with Ipswich playing Brighton today. I'm sort of hoping Ipswich get their first win at some point sort of soon, but I'm not sure it's going to be against Brighton. These sort of... they just seem to have just plucked this manager almost out of thin air. We sort of did so well with Sampaoli, getting them out of the Bundesliga 2. I believe it's just called that. With sort of a very fun system and style, and it's clearly working for the moment. There might be a time later in the season that I think some teams might start getting wise to how they play, potentially. But I think there's still a lot of quality and a lot of depth with that Brighton team, in particular in the forward positions, when you can rotate people like Matoma, Ndingra, Yankuba Minter. You've got so many options there. It's just... It's worrying for any team that goes up against them. Chelsea are a strange one. Obviously, they lost to Man City. Can't hold too much of that against them. They absolutely smashed Wolves 6-2, and arguably the game of the season so far. And then the draw against Palace. Now, I feel like they should have done more to put the Palace game to bed to get the points there. I wouldn't begrudge them sort of a 2-0 defeat against City. And Wolves was sort of a fun one, showing that when things click with Chelsea, they can be very, very fun to watch. If they manage to organise those options up top, maybe getting it settled, maybe just finding a balance in the rotation. I mean, myself personally, I see the attacking four as Pedro Neto on the left, Nicholas Jackson up front, Palmer in the middle, and probably Madueke on the right, because he looked amazing against Wolves. He's so sort of confident in getting his shot away and that he's going to score, and he's sort of very young as well. However, obviously there's going to have to be a lot of rotation there with the sheer depth that they've got, with bringing people like João Felix and Jadon Sancho. And you've got Dewsbury Hall, who ideally wants to sit behind the striker. You're not easily replacing Palmer, so it's still a question of, can you keep these players happy? Is there going to be enough rotation? But do you want to sort of rotate that much if or when you found out what's working for you? So this is sort of an interesting one to sort of see how it goes further on into the season, whether there's a heavy rotation or whether Maresca finds what he likes and sticks to it and just says, like, thank you very much, stick with that. Next up we have Crystal Palace. They've only got sort of 1 point out the first 3 games. They had the defeat against Brentford 2-1. They lost to West Ham 2-0. And they drew 1-1 with Chelsea. They did very well to get the point against Chelsea. I think Chelsea had plenty of chances to sort of do something more there and obviously didn't. Brentford, I still worry about the Eze free kick, being able to just sort of turn that around and Brentford just going up there and scoring like that. And West Ham, I think, have been one of the best recruiting teams during the summer. I think they've spent their money very well, and I'm looking for them to do quite well this season. So I don't know. I'm a little bit like some of those games were sort of down to the finer points, the finer details, sort of concentrating the full 90. Ideally, you'd want to see them be sort of beating the teams around where they're sort of expecting to finish. Like, I'm expecting Brentford and West Ham to potentially be middle of the pack. If you need to you want to be beating teams in that sort of like, almost like mini league, as it were. Sort of, you've got sort of the top couple of teams. You've got teams competing for Europe, sort of mid-Premier teams, and you've got the teams that are sort of trying to stay afloat, as it were. That's how I picture the structure of the Premier League, and I want to see Palace sort of ideally getting points against those teams because they're going to face tougher opposition and potentially struggle. So you need to be getting wins where you can, so you don't get sucked into anything. Obviously, I think Palace will be fine. Going through the season, they'll have easier opposition as well as harder opposition, but sort of expected a little bit more because of how hot they were coming off of the end of last season. Maybe things are just cooling off a little bit. Speaking of a team that's completely cooled off, it's just Everton. Absolutely awful. Absolutely awful. I was very confident and bullish over Everton at the start of the season. I believe that under Dyche, they had one of the stronger defensive units in the Premier League last season. I think some of their recruitment hasn't been too bad. But they just got absolutely sort of demolished against sort of Brighton in the second half in particular. Spurs absolutely pummeled them, and the Bournemouth game, you've got that game in the bag, and you're winning sort of 2-1 in the 91st minute, and to have it thrown away like that, I'm sorry. The goals were very similar. I don't really know what to sort of say with Everton. I mean, I'm sort of happy as an Ipswich fan that they're propping up the table and not us, but I was expecting more. I think the international break may have come at the right time for them, so maybe they'll sort of, the manager will sort of got them in, sat them down, worked on sort of a few things, and just sort of being able to sort of bounce back this coming weekend because they were clearly not there. The break might have done them the favour. We'll wait and see on that, but the morale there looks absolutely just horrendous, and I'm slightly worried that Dyche is sort of the closest to to winning the sack race at this moment in time. Well, I think he's a fantastic manager, but something here isn't right. Something here might need changing. I don't know whether the backroom staff will think of doing something sooner rather than later, but he's a good manager, and I would like to think that given a few more games, ideally, hopefully if they have sort of a nicer run of fixtures coming up soon, the things should sort themselves out. But I don't know, maybe it's a question of sort of getting a nice balance within that team. I mean, it's good that they've got people like Calvert-Lewin scoring again, but the amount of goals they're conceding, this was a team that was, I think, third or fourth best defence last year behind sort of Arsenal and City. Jordan Pickford was immense. The defensive unit was immense. They only lost games by 1 or 2. But to get sort of conceding sort of 3 goals, 4 goals, 3 goals, it's not good enough. And you need to remain tight at the back. It's as simple as that. So I'm hoping for more, but they've been very underwhelming so far. Fulham have been about where I sort of expect them to be. They drew with United. I think that was a very close game, which Fulham, because of how close it was, might think that they were sort of wanting to get something out of that. The victory over Leicester, sort of expected. Leicester still trying to find their feet within the league, and then the draw against Ipswich. To me, not being completely biased, I think there was sort of a bit of fortune towards the ends of the game that they managed to hold on for the point, as it were. But they're sort of getting points where they sort of can. Looking at sort of some of those are trickier away games. Leicester was at home, so I'd like to think that Craven Cottage, I think, is sort of going to be the safe sort of thing for Fulham. I think they'll get sort of a good few points there and be safe. But I think this is sort of bang on sort of expectation for Fulham. I think they've obviously recruited well. I think Marco Silva is a very underrated manager. And I think they've got a potential to give a few teams sort of some real issues coming later on into the season. Next we'll have Ipswich. Arguably had the toughest start to the season, having had Liverpool, Man City and Fulham. Obviously Fulham maybe not so much. Liverpool game, I think Ipswich gave a good account of themselves in the first half. I think the excitement from the crowd and sort of being back in the league gave everyone sort of a big kick up the backside, but I think they ran out of energy in the second half, and Liverpool just ended up showing their quality, unfortunately. Sort of going into the next game, City away, arguably one of the toughest away games to go to. I think our goalkeeper arguably didn't have the best game, Haaland being absolutely lethal. I'd like to think that this could be the first time me complaining about refereeing decisions, as I think there was no consistency in this one. I think there was an incident where Savio buys a penalty off of Leif Davis and arguably should have given one away against the same player in the reverse. Not saying that this would have changed the result, but, well, it might have made things look a little bit better if Ipswich City will still end up winning the game, but that's sort of my first worry over the refereeing decisions, I suppose. We'll see how angry or frustrated I get later on in the season. Sort of good draw against Fulham. Sort of showed a lot of fight there and could have got the 3 points towards the end. That's sort of going to be my worry, is I think Portman Road is where Ipswich need to get their points, and they need to be getting points against teams like Fulham. They're going to struggle against the bigger teams when going for European football, so they need to be turning those draws into wins or those defeats into draws, as it were. So we'll sort of see how that develops. Obviously, with City and Liverpool out the way, I'd like to think that the fixtures will come a little bit easier to Ipswich going sort of further on. Admittedly, maybe not today, being away against Brighton, but we'll see. Next, we have Leicester, another promoted team. I think they're still finding their feet. I think they did well to get the draw against Spurs, who I think were adjusting some of their new signings, sort of the 1-1, the Jamie Vardy sort of giving it large to the Spurs fans, but sort of defeats against Fulham and defeats against Villa. They'll potentially have easier games. They're also another team that needs to rely on their home form, ideally, to get the job done. They can clearly sort of have been scoring, needing to keep sort of clean sheets and remain sort of tight and tidy at the back, which I think is something Steve Cooper is usually very good at. I don't know whether this is sort of a settled 11 yet. They don't have the points deduction looming over them now, so that might be a bit of pressure off of the manager and the players. So that could be the kick that they need to sort of push on throughout the season. Next we have Liverpool, who have been arguably the best team in the league so far. Haven't conceded yet. 2-0 victory against Ipswich, 2-0 victory against Brentford, 3-0 victory against Man United. Arne Slot doesn't seem to have tactically had to change sort of too much. It's sort of slight tweaks to how they used to play under Klopp, but not major. So the players haven't had to struggle too much adjusting to how they play. And obviously they remain sort of very sort of tight at the back. Still one of the best counter-attacking teams I've sort of seen over the last few years, and that maintained sort of a hallmark there. Salah still looks like he's going to get 20 plus goals a season. You've sort of got the other forwards who look absolutely lethal. I think Luis Diaz, I was unsure of him towards the end of last season, but he looks incredible so far this season. Diego Jota being able to pop up with goals. That defence looking just sort of absolutely nice and tidy. They might have sort of tougher opposition sort of later on, but beat what's in front of you and that looked incredible. Man City. Man City, obviously another team that have won all their games. 2-0 against Chelsea, 4-1 against Ipswich, 3-1 against West Ham. I think the Chelsea game, Chelsea looked good in moments, but Chelsea got the job done. And then sort of got very comfortable victories over Ipswich and West Ham with Haaland once again just bang goals in for fun. What is he, sort of 7 odd goals now? It's absolutely ridiculous. Sort of 2 hat-tricks in the first 3 games. I would be hoping and praying for City's sake that he doesn't get injured, as he hasn't had a major injury for City like he has in his previous times at Salzburg and at Borussia Dortmund, which might be the Achilles heel if they have not recruited another outstanding number 9. At the moment, they're just next level, and it's going to be hard to see many other teams sort of stopping them start of this season. You're hoping they mess things up the season. Normally they start quite slow into a Premier League and then just turn of the year they just kick into gear and they just don't lose. If they're starting like this is very worrying for the rest of the league. However, if they're starting like this, there might be the chance that they sort of have a blip sort of a bit earlier or somewhere else in the season. So we'll see. Man United, I was very bullish on them at the start of the season. I think they recruited very well. And regardless of the results, I think overall the team is playing better football. Unfortunately, this is still a game judged by results. So they won 1-0 against Fulham. Sort of nice enough sort of new sign to get their goal. Lost 2-1 against Brighton. I think they were a bit unfortunate because of the sort of Garnacho incident. I think if that goal goes in, I think United probably do get the job done if sort of Xerxes doesn't touch that. I think if it turns 2-1 United, I don't think Brighton recover in the same way. And 3-0 Liverpool, I think Casemiro, I think he just looked off the pace. The midfield looked off the pace. I still worry about them because I in particular that midfield, because they, under this Ten Hag system, they have to cover so much ground because of how they play. It's not, they've got to have a near limitless sort of peak Kante levels of fitness to be able to get around the pitch. It's insane what's being asked of them, and it then ends up sort of making the centre backs be made to look very foolish by absolutely world class talent. So I almost feel sorry for De Ligt and sort of Euros walking into this team if that midfield is not sorted out. Now, they did bring Agate in, so hopefully he'll start sort of this weekend. Ideally, I think you need to be giving Casemiro a rest. I like Kobbie Mainoo in the midfield because he's the one that can do the progression. He's brilliant close control. I like to see an Agate-Mainoo partnership. Agate, someone that likes to get in the tackle. Whether he can cover the amount of ground needed is probably the better question to ask. Hopefully he does, but the issue with United is they've been trying to get sort of the last few seasons they've signed one player and hoping that fixes absolutely everything. It doesn't. It takes several players, sort of a good structure to fix the problems. I sort of worry they're still going to be consistently inconsistent, I think, is how I'm going to be looking at United throughout the season. Maybe the new signing turns things around, but I don't see the dramatic change, enough of a dramatic change in how they play at the moment. They've looked sharper in attack, I'll give them that, but they still look very questionable at the back, regardless of new signings, and I don't think it's necessarily down to the players if it's consistently happening in this manner. I think it's a tactical thing. I don't think it's an individual thing. So something needs to be looked at there. Next, we've got Newcastle. Newcastle, I was very bullish on the start of the season. I think they've looked pretty solid, pretty good. Managed to get the win over Southampton, even with their defender sort of losing their head and sort of being down to 10 men for 80 plus minutes, as it were. Bournemouth, I think it was a bit of a blip. I think away from home, I think Bournemouth gave them something they weren't expecting, that level of fight, grit and determination. I would want to see one thing I always argue with Newcastle, and the best things about them is that they press and press and press, and there's so much energy sort of that goes into how they play. And they came up against Bournemouth. I think that they need to keep an eye on those sorts of games if they want to be pushing for higher up in the European positions. If they sort of can hopefully meet my expectations of them from my previous predictions video, I'll be very happy with that, but we'll see. The Spurs game, I think they were clinical and they got the job done, which sometimes is all that matters, because I think Spurs created a lot of chances there and did not take them. Moving on, Nottingham Forest. They weren't a team I was too keen on at the start of the season. They've arguably had sort of some of the nicer fixtures. If Ipswich have had the hardest, I would argue the Nottingham Forest have had the easiest. Sort of with draw against Bournemouth, I think is a good solid point against a Bournemouth team that I think will cause other teams issues. 1-0 win against Southampton, who still I'm unsure whether the quality is there. And then sort of 1-1 draw against Wolves, who have looked a little bit toothless here and there, but you could argue that they've played some tough opposition, so shouldn't hold them that too much against them. Next, we've got Southampton. All 3 games, all 3 defeats. Losing 1-0 to Newcastle. That was a big opportunity there. First game of the season to make a real statement out with Newcastle bound down to 10 men. You need them to be making a difference. Obviously, they kept it to the one. They kept it to the one against Forest. I'd want to sort of see them, particularly at home, Southampton, getting points, whether it's draws, whether it's wins. They need to get points on the board against sort of, and putting up enough of a fight against the Forests and sort of the Brentfords afterwards next, who they lost 3-1 to. Sort of, they scored a hell of a goal. That's the Japanese right back, who I'm not going to butcher his name by even attempting. Still need a good bit more from them. I'd still be very worried about Southampton sort of looking at things sort of further on down the road, but we'll see. Next we have Spurs, who I think had sort of a strong recruitment, or bringing in youngsters like Archie Gray, bringing in sort of a proper striker with Dominic Solanke. I was sort of expecting them to sort of kick on, potentially be pushing very hard for those Champions League spaces. They're the draw against Leicester, which I don't know whether it's down to potential naivety, but they should be winning games like that. I'm sorry, if it's away at Leicester, I think you should be getting points there. Plural, not singular. Next, you've got the victory against Everton. I thought they looked very good, sort of took all their chances, really put them to the sword, which is what sometimes you need to do, and just absolutely incredible. And then the Newcastle game, they need to take the chances. They've got a new number 9. They need to take their chances. Newcastle only had a couple of chances and took them. Spurs had the lion's share of possession there. Even the most avid Newcastle fan will say they got very lucky and that was a robbery there. So there's something to look at. Let's move on to West Ham. A tough defeat against Aston Villa. Aston Villa are a good team, sort of looking around the European places, so not too surprising there. They got sort of a good 2-0 win against Palace. That's a team that I would consider a rival position-wise in the Premier League. Sort of nice, comfortable victory. And then obviously the defeat against Man City, where Haaland just lives up to his robot-like name. This sort of is sort of run-of-the-mill what I'd sort of expect from West Ham, as I think they've had some tough games there, I think, and still getting 3 points out of the 3 there, I think is probably fairly good. I think they'll have easier games against sort of teams in the mid to lower reaches of the Premier League where they're going to really pick up points, because I think of the Palace game, I think it was big, and I think they can start to pick up points when the fixtures are a little kinder to them. Wolves, I think, have sort of struggled a bit. Arguably tough opposition, going to Arsenal and losing 2-0. I think there are plenty of other teams that are going to go there and get absolutely pummeled. The Chelsea game, I don't know whether it was just Chelsea clicking or Wolves just not quite being at the races that day, as it were. Solid enough point against Forest. They need to be looking at sort of at wins if they're sort of getting sort of battered by the other teams. I think they'll have easier fixtures to come, so I'm not gonna sort of be too harsh on Wolves for the moment, because I rate Gary O'Neill very highly as a manager. I think he will find a way to get things sorted, but just sort of middle of the road for now. So I've gone through every team. Who do you think's been underachieving, overachieving, just about what you expected? Now the Premier League's back for this coming weekend, how do you think your team's going to get on? I need likes, and comments, and subscribers. Any help would be appreciated. Thank you very much. I'll see you all later.